Okay, now everything in English. As I told you yesterday, we will have the first chapter on body politics held in English with our guests here on the table. And via Zoom, we have artists and curators transferred via Zoom. Yes, so welcome to our second day of We Do Our Photography, where we focus on two important subjects that also show up in artistic production and so, of course, in photography. Yesterday, if you happen to be there yesterday, on our first day we heard many different voices and approaches to photographic teaching. We talked about new kinds of tools and the way these tools are used for artistic practices. We discussed also how to label photography and how to use the medium and in what alliance with other media photography is used in the different high schools and academies. We talked about how photography connects not only us to the world, but also the people who use it and talk about it. We discussed authorship, and whether a work of art urgently needs an author, or whether art can exist without authorship, and instead create a communal collective or an artificial intelligence. We heard about the importance of sharing and reflecting on an initial artistic idea as it emerges, but also, like Michael Reich stated, that theory can kill practice. We heard that photography, which I found super interesting, can create community. And at the end of the day, we ask ourselves in the final discussion round if it is photography we are talking about, or whether photography is a means to the end that we talk to each other at all. So while yesterday we discussed the how and the why, today it's about the what. What are the important subjects of artistic and curatorial practice? And what exactly happens in the studios and the museums? With body politics and climate change, we have chosen two topics that could, of course, fill entire days and discussions on their own. But within the framework of We Do Our Photography, we want to set impulses, ask questions, open the discourse, and as stated yesterday as well, all the themes and topics of We Do Our Photography will play a significant role as exhibitions in our next festival in May 2023, in May. As I said, unfortunately, there are last-minute changes to the program today due to 2 cases of illness. Unfortunately, our moderator, Magnus Elias Rosengarten, whom we had planned as such a meaningful link and with whom you already discussed a lot of things, has fallen ill, and also the artist Donia Nasseri. But we have plans for today as the follow. I'm very pleased that Delphine Biedl is stepping in for introductory works, and there she is, which is not that difficult for her because in her artistic and curatorial works she deals with this topic of body politics since years. So many thanks to Delphine for stepping in at the very last minute. And afterwards, we start with the first dialogue between Sophie Charlotte-Opitz and Lucia Halder. I will introduce you later on after the introductory words of Delphine. And then we have a break as scheduled at around 1 p.m. and continue with the dialogue of Delphine, Miki, and Antonio. And after the dialogue between Sophie, Lucia, and Lebohang, then of course we welcome Doris Gassert at the stage, and she will talk about the work of Frida Oropabo, as the Photo Museum in Winterthur recently had a show with her, and then she will get in conversation with Delphine Biedl as well. So, Delphine, shall we get you a coffee first? Okay, so you're very welcome.
Yes, guten Tag, hello everyone. So I was just asked to step in to replace Magnus to do this introduction on body politics and the next panel climate change. So just a few words, why body politics, what it is, hello? Hi. What it is and what does it matter. Over the last years, I've been working on helping, contributing through conversation, exhibition, education, programming to see how we could make the world of photography more inclusive. This is essential, and we will go more into this topic in the panel that we will do this afternoon at 2, together with Antonio and Miki. But why does it matter? Because we know that we speak often about representation. Who has access to representation is, for me, the last step of a process to come to representation. You have access to words, to images, to thinking about yourself critically. And in many places of the world, this process is not possible. You cannot be publicly who you want to be or who you think you are. So representation is already a form of emancipation if you have achieved the possibility to produce these words and these images. And how do we facilitate this process as institutions, as artists, as educators, for everyone to come to this process of being able to produce image that you feel represent you, or communities where you feel you can belong. And that's a very layered and complex process, of course. But I think that's some of the topics I will be address today. Who has a voice, and to who do you speak, and how do you speak, and is it safe to speak? So that's definitely some of the topics we will address in our panel. Doris will also present some of the exhibition she's been doing. And the other point, which I think is very important, which is another element I've been working on by co-creating the foundation Engagement Arts, is that we know out of survey made in a lot of countries that there is a correlation between socioeconomic precarity and abuse of power. So creating a safe environment starts by fair pay, fair play, and creating good working conditions for everyone. And I think that's also an underlying topic for today. And how do we create these conditions is some of the topics. Regarding climate change, few words also. Today, indigenous population, among others in the Amazon, are taking care of 80% of biodiversity in the world. But they represent about only 5% of the world population. Their existence is threatened, their land is threatened in so many ways, and the work they do is essential for us here to be. So how also can we address this urgency, hear their call, support their work? I feel it's an absolute urgency. And there are many ways to look at climate change also from our perspective. What are we doing? There are very few institutions today that have a policy to make exhibitions sustainable, but it's a process that is being activated in different parts of the world. So how can we, as artists, writers, curators, also support this process? Will be some of the questions I think that will be raised in the afternoon. And I don't know if there are some questions.
So, thank you, Delphine. And I totally forgot to introduce you to the audience. I'm so sorry. Delphine Biedl is a feminist curator. She's a lecturer, artist, and director of MetaBooks. The focus of her work is gender and photography, and I think you all just heard what her topics in her research and artistic research are a long-time advocate of more inclusive environment in the arts. She works with leading cultural institutions, museums, photography festivals, and art and design academies. And recently, Delphine organized a really huge symposium and panel on feminism in the Netherlands called Invisibilities. And she co-founded the Roadmap for Equality in the Arts and Engagement in the Netherlands. And moreover, she writes for books and magazines. So very welcome, Delphine, at this point. So I would step over to Lucia and Sophie. If you want to, you can take a seat.
Yep. If you want, you can,
but you can also
stay here as well if you want.
Yeah, and we bring you a coffee.
You're warmly invited.
Yeah. Definitely. Okay. So, Lucia Halder. She has been the head of the photographic collection of the Rautenstrauch Museum. This is the coffee for Delphine we have to go through. Since 2015. And after studying history and art history, she worked as a research assistant at the House of History of the Federal Republic of Germany and as a freelance exhibition organizer, among other positions. She's a chair of the history and archive section of the German Photographic Society, and as such, she will tomorrow moderate our symposium on photo albums in archives. And Sophie Charlotte-Opitz, very welcome, holds a PhD in art and media studies and is the artistic director of the Museum Villa Roth in Burgrieden. During fellowships from the Alfred Krupp von Bohlen und Halbach Foundation, among others, and as collection manager of a photographic collection, she has realized exhibitions worldwide, internationally. Her research interests include global image, hegemonies, and visual culture of memory. And recently, congratulations to that, she received the Thomas Mann House Fellowship of 2023 in Los Angeles. So the stage is yours, and of course, in a few minutes, in a few seconds, we will welcome the artist Lebohang Kganye. On this screen, Lebohang. Hi, Lebohang.
Hello. Can you hear us?
We cannot hear you.
Yeah. Can you hear us?
Oh,
Hello.
yeah.
Hi, Lebohang. So Lebohang is a visual artist. I quickly introduce yourself. Can you see me? Oh no, you can probably. Can she see me?
I can see you perfectly.
Okay. She's a visual artist and photographer from Johannesburg. She received a diploma in fine arts from the University of Johannesburg in 2014 and is currently pursuing her master's in fine arts at Witwatersrand University in South Africa. Lebohang often combines the archival and the performative with a practice that focuses on storytelling and memory as it plays out in the familial experience. Even as her work reflects particular South African experience, she critically engages with oral traditions as specific forms and memories as tangible source materials. In 2022, she's one of the 3 contemporary artists to representing South Africa at the Venice Biennale. You did that. And of course, Lebohang, we are very happy to have you as one of the artists in our Artist Meets Archive program. Maybe we will talk about that later on. So very welcome. Lebohang, I don't know if you see the audience, we see you, and yeah, have fun with your dialogue.
All of you.
Okay.
Hi, Lebohang. So good to see you. Good to see all of you as well. And thanks for inviting us, dear Fotoscene. I think this is going to be an amazing talk. We are perfectly color coordinated, the 4 of us. And so this is setting the tone, I would say. I would like to give a brief perspective, just a thought for all of us, that this was originally meant to be a little bit different. So we had an amazing moderator who should accompany us in this talk, Magnus, who hopefully will get soon better. And he has a performance studies background, and we were very excited to talk with him as well, because he has the interdisciplinary perspective on body politics. He studied in New York performance studies, right? And did courses on the black body in photography. So we know that this part is now missing on our table. And we know as well that physically it's the three of us who are sitting here now wanting to have a focus on colonial and post-colonial dynamics. So being aware of the setting now, we even more want to invite the audience to take part in this discussion of the photographic discourse when it comes to talking about the colonial gaze, about body politics, about post-colonial structures and approaches in this topic. And this just for all of us that we think about this. And I think I now let you speak about why it's so amazing to have Lebo as well as a part of this talk, because her approach so much gives us
new
perspective on why we are sitting here and why it's so important to talk about body politics. Yeah.
Hello, everybody, also from my side. And thank you, Delphine, for the introduction to the huge topic, body politics. And so we would like to narrow down this huge topic a little bit. And as Sophie already introduced, is that we are focusing on the image-making process of a part of colonial rule, of constructing and then deconstructing colonial gaze. And so we were wondering why talking about body politics and the colonial gaze, and we would like to focus on how the image-making process is a vital part of how colonial domination is constructed and deconstructed. And we would also like to talk about the shift in the discourse from photography as a mere tool of power and domination to what Ariella Azoulay calls the civil contract of photography. So to open up the discourse on all people involved in the photographic process, also us as the viewers, the photographed and the photographer. And this is why we invited Lebohang, because in her work, and we will see it in the
1 minute
presentation in a second, yes. So we are having a look with the artistic work of Lebohang, which might give an insight in why we were so excited to talk to Lebohang about her work, because this question of the dichotomy of who photographs and who gets photographed is dissolving in her artistic practice, because as you can see, she's the photographer and the photographed in one person. So that for us was a very good starting point to start a discussion about using the body as a tool of empowerment, or using the body for storytelling and telling histories and stories of the past, but also of the present. So my first question to you, Lebohang, would be, why and how do you use your body for addressing family narratives and family memory?
So the work really started with me having an interest in the family history, particularly from the point of the family name. But with me traveling in different parts of South Africa, trying to locate my family, I then discovered a lot of these photographs, like family photographs that were taken at different parts of the country where my family had lived or where they'd been relocated. And so the work really starts with this archival material, and then also becomes I then extend on it based on these narratives that my family had shared with me about the family history. So because of the shift in time, and a lot of these stories that my family were telling me were from a period that I had not lived in, I basically was imagining their memories. And so the work is very much about this, the play between the imaginary and memory, and the sort of performance in these family stories, and the performance of also sharing this family narrative. And so that's why the work has me in it, because I'm basically restaging their memories. So it is about the play between memory and fantasy.
Okay, so was it an active decision to use your body to use your body in all your work? Was it like an active decision, or did it develop from one work to the other?
I mean, it definitely was an active decision. I think that a large part of it had a lot to do with this sharing of time and space. So with a lot of the photos that I have reenacted in the first series that we showed, a story about my grandfather, because he became central in the family narrative as the first person to move to the city. And so before everyone got their homes and were looking for jobs in the city, they all lived in his house. And so he became quite central in the family narrative. And so I had not met him because he passed away before I was born. And so, this reenactment of these stories and me basically embodying him was also about this, this possibility of photography also bring us closer to loved ones. But also these sort of multiplicities of time. And so it really, playing my grandfather out and embodying him, I felt also allowed for me to draw closer to him. I think similar to the series that I did about my mother, which was very much about drawing close to family members that had passed on.
Just to add some thoughts on your amazing work, I think it's very important to understand that when it comes to memory and working with memory content, we do have to understand that photography is nothing which is static. So in a way of each photograph can be interpreted in various ways, and so it's not like the same memory content gets represented when we see one photograph. It's always an activation, it's always a triggering of our own memories, our own experiences, which we did when we encounter photographs. And what you are doing, Lebo, is so beautifully like reworking exactly this, that memory is something which is fragmented and photography is something which is fragmented. So you are doing it in different ways. For example, in the work we are seeing right now, you are working with layers of past photographs with new photographs of yourself, restaging your mother's photographs or your photographs of your mother, showing this fragile state of memory through this, or the history of your grandfather moving to the city is very, in your approach, very fragmented. So you understand, and with you, I mean, like us, we do understand through these works that it's memory is complex. Memory is nothing which is static, and we have to understand memory work, when it comes to photography, when it comes to our body, as something which has constantly get activated so that we can live memory. So this idea of lived memory is exactly what I see in your work, that you are using your body, and you can agree or disagree on this, as a medium to live the memory, to rethink it and expand this memory through your work. This is just a comment on this.
I agree. I think also it has, I think with both the works that we've just shown, that I also dress in a very particular way, like with the photos of my mother, where it's, it's clothes of hers from when she was in her 20s, that have outlived her, the same way that these photographs have outlived her, but have now come to represent her, even though it's one sort of fragment of her life. Majority of her life was spent in the factory because she was a factory worker since she was in her 20s. But there aren't any photos of her in her factory worker's uniform. I think similar to my grandfather, who came to the city and became a factory worker. But all the photos that outlive him are he's wearing a suit. And so this idea of the body and clothes, and also I think clothes that you leave behind, that the generations that get left behind who then wear them and sort of continue, they embody you, I think, to a large degree. And so for me also the idea of body also has a lot to do. I think within that is also clothing and these garments that similar to photographs that then become these items that, that represent you, or that are used in activating your family's memories of you. I think clothes, are similar in that sense.
Sophie, you were studying memory studies, right? Or have a degree in memory studies. So what role does the body play when you study memory studies at university, or is it?
What it plays at university is a very interesting question. Waking up every morning, going there, you need your body. No, let me think about it. I think we have to understand that memory is something, there are different concepts about memory and how memory works, and I'm especially talking about collective memory content and memory cultures. But what's like state of the arts is to understand that we have to constantly activate memory content, because otherwise, and this is something which like in our brain as well, so there are parallels between like societal dynamics as well, like in our brain we have to constantly activate memory content to remember. So because otherwise it's pretty difficult for me to do this in English, but like the stimulus of our brain needs to get activated to work and to remember. So the body is something we use to trigger and to strengthen memory. So for example, doing this is something like working with our hands while we are talking is strengthening our stimulus to remember. This is like on an individual level, but using the body in collective performances of remembering, and we do have this, for example, by doing protests on the streets, so that we, with our physical body, go on the streets, remember things, like using our body for the right of representation you were talking about, for example, and deconstructing hegemonic power structures where the body gets repressed is something to constantly remind ourselves what has been, what we have to deconstruct if there have been repressive structures, for example, and now like to get the circle round in colonial discourses. So, like, using your body as a tool of empowerment is absolutely the right way to activate memory content.
So talking about using the body for empowerment brings me to the term agency, like using agency for, so how do you define agency, Lebohang, in your work or in general, when it comes to photographs?
I think also the what Sophie has just spoken about, I find quite interesting also about the images of protest, for example, and also certain images that were, I think that with photos like family images or personal archives versus more historical or institutional archival material was always something that I found interesting, and that sort of play of which one had, like, the sort of hierarchy within archival material as well that exists. And so, the decision to also continue to work with the personal story and personal archives and family archives was also about that. It was about, the sort of narrative that exists around sort of South African photography, which is important. I think that there's many historical images that speak to the period in which also I'm speaking to, which which my grandparents lived in, my mother lived in, the apartheid era, and there's a very particular image that stands in for that period within the South African context. And so the decision also to work with archival material was also about this counter image or this counter archive, and also this image of that's outside of the protest image, this image that's outside of the image of apartheid. And so that for me was a decision that I made, and how does that connect to the right now, and that's why I think there's always that play between the different time periods, the past and the present, with me being in the sort of present, but also existing in the past as I'm activating these memories of from the past.
I think this is something we have to bear in mind, that this is exactly the point about your work. You are not just restaging what has been. You're connecting the past and the present to create something new. It's not a restaging what you do. I think this is really, when you see the work, to understand it's not just repeating the past, recreating, but to connecting these different layers of time in the work.
Yes, I think also there's many conversations for my generation of photographers. There's many conversations around identity, and so a lot of that I think is explored in a lot of works by photographers from South Africa, from my generation, and that sort of sits. It's very different sort of images from the older generation, your David Goldblatt images, which are extremely powerful images, but it's a very different. The work is doing different work, and so what photography and what younger photographers are sort of trying to do right now is really see, I think, themselves or document South Africa post apartheid, and these sort of questions that we have about whether we can even use the term post apartheid and to what degree. And so a lot of the work that comes out is very much about these questions and around identity and this constant looking back to the past, because of all of these questions that we have about the state of politics, about the state of our families. Also, the work is very much about understanding why Black families are also the way that they are, in the state that they are. The broken families, the wounded families, all the different wounds, and really trying to create a space for with myself for those conversations. And there's an exhibition actually that I'll be having next year at the Barnes Foundation, which very much speaks to this idea of the generational dialogue. And the work very much is also about that generational dialogue. Intergenerational.
So you, in your work, you're often working with your family archive and with personal memories. And in our common project right now, the Artist Meets Archive project, you are confronted with the archive of the Rautenstrauch-Just Museum, the archive of the Ethnographic Museum. So. It's totally different from family memories. So how was your encounter with these images of photographs from colonial contexts and photographed bodies from colonial contexts? Can you tell something about that?
I think that the collection itself is not, it's not easy to be confronted with. It's not because you do not know as an artist or as a photographer that work exists. But I think to see it physically, to touch it, and to see how much of it exists, and then to think about, the work and the images that are specifically taken from Africa, and by who are they taken, under what conditions. And so I think that the work that I'm still doing or still conceptualizing is, there's still many questions. I think that, obviously my first interest in working through the collection was in looking at what images were taken from in Africa or in South Africa, and if they were female photographers that who exist within that collection. And so the idea also of the female gaze within the colonial context was an interest for me as a starting point as well. And then how are the images different to what exists currently, and how people are photographing currently was also a question for me. And so that's really where I am with how I thought through the collection.
What I found, what always, is so challenging with archives from colonial contexts is that there are so many bodies captured on paper in archival boxes, in an archival setting. And lately we were discussing the question of, can a photograph be a human remain? So I would be really interested what you or what all of you think about this this question. So is this trace of light maybe more than just a photograph, but is it a human remain? So what do you think?
I have an opinion on this. I think we have to activate these photographs, otherwise there's no remain as well. And this is again about accessibility and visibility and contextualization of these photographs so that they can become a human remain. And Lucia, you are working in this institution which has a huge archive of photographs which I assume a lot of them are about unidentified people and individuals and groups. So can you maybe give more context about why it's so important, for example, to invite artists like Lebo to work with you together on these archives, which might be not encountered yet? It's all about this question of institutional accessibility or making visible the invisible.
Yes, it's why I'm so excited about this program, Artist Meets Archive, and like inviting artists to work with the art archive, especially with the colonial archive, is because there is a need for a view from the outside, because the colonial archive, of course, like every archive, is not a neutral repository of documents. And there are so many untold stories in the archives, and so this point of activating that you meant is, from my point of view, only possible by opening up the archive and open it up for many different perspectives, and not making the documents slumber in the museum, or maybe. Of course, we critically engage with this legacy, but it needs an opening, and it needs many voices to talk about those images. It needs they need to be discussed, and from different perspectives. Do you want to add something? Or?
Yes, regarding archive, you mentioned earlier the word counter-archive. And I was curious to hear where you would locate that within your practice, because obviously colonial images can't be decolonized, but where would you situate that, or how?
I mean, I think that is always the point of traveling for me. Like for example, with the part of the archive that I'm interested in, which is about Cameroon, and so part of me also working with any archival material is very much also about traveling to the place, and the oral history, or the conversation with people from Cameroon, for example, like in the sense, and some of the people ideally that are related, sort of like maybe family members or friends that are related to certain parts of the archive. Like for example, with the Marie Thorebecca, whose work I'll be looking at, and the sort of journey that they took throughout Cameroon, and some of the people that, let's say, carried their luggage and all the different things that they collected along the journey and people related to them is how I'm looking at starting the research phase. But what the work becomes, I can't say at this point, but I think I always work with oral history, and with that, I think to sort of stand alongside or to counter what's in the image.
I just quickly want to add something, that archives and photography have something huge in common, that they both were celebrated in the 19th century as incorruptible depictions of reality, which we all know is bullshit, but it's still effective in our minds. So we always have to work on deconstructing this objectivity. And that's why this approach, for example, Lebohang's approach, is so important.
And I think, especially in the colonial discourse, we do have to understand that there has been representation without the right of your own image. So there has been like a negative representation, a forced or like a channeled representation in a way which hasn't been connected to any agency of the ones who got photographed. And to give another example on this idea of archives and counter-archives, there is this amazing research work of Tamar Gab on an archive of Alfred Duggan Cronin, who traveled in different countries in the southern part of Africa around the 19th century, photographing different ethnic groups, and he had like this genuine interest in depicting these ethnic groups, but by doing so, he was absolutely using an image language which was like repeating the patterns of the colonial gaze. So what Tamar then encountered was a counter archive from, not Tamar, sorry, it was Santu Mofokeng who encountered a counter archive of photographs of black families who, and now we come to what you, Lebo, what you were talking about the clothes, who were photographing or going to photo studios in South Africa, photographing themselves in a way they wanted to get represented. And they dressed themselves in a way they wanted to show themselves. And by contrasting, and this is what Tamar then did, by contrasting these family album photos of black citizens who wanted to be represented in one way and like mirroring it to Alfred Duggan Cronin's archives of photos of people who got represented in a way he wanted to represent them, you absolutely see the difference of agency which happened in these different archives and how different the visibilities, like the politics behind of it, is of these bodies you see in the photographs.
I think that there's also coming back to what you're saying and also to what Lucia had asked about agency. I think there's so much agency within family photographs that is really overlooked. And I think that with a work like Santu Mofokeng, he's really, I think that work that you're speaking to specifically, there's so much power, I think, in that where you aren't imposing as a photographer. It is about people actively going to the studio and deciding that this is, how I want to be represented. And so for me, there is so much power within family photographs, and especially I think within that context, it's like even with the photos that were taken of my family, there would be a street photographer that they would call to come on a particular day for their photo to be taken, at the house. So they didn't have a camera, but they were making an active decision around how they wanted to be photographed, but also within their personal context. And so for me, I think also thinking around this work of, I think it's called the Black Photo Album by Santu Mofokeng, is something that I also write about within my master's work in relation to Kilefalaka, as really an important work that, that allowed for me to also think through my family photo album in a very particular way.
Just to add, and this is like what I think is beautiful, like I think the before the Black Photo Album, isn't there like the title Look at Me? It's called Look at Me, the Black Photo Album, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's so what Santu Mofokeng like added to these photographs are questions of him, like what he created just for you, like to understand the work, questions which show the complexity of this topic, because you can read also these photographs, which are all about Black agency in a colonial way as well, if you are misunderstanding them. So if you, so what Santu is doing is to show the power of context as well, right? Like how important it is to frame, and now we come to institutional work as well, how to frame these archives to give them the right to be understood in the way they want to be understood, right? And to reframing them, to re-asking them, and to always think with the discourse we are integrating them.
And that there always has been counter-narratives and counter-images in the archives. You just have to look for them and search them.
I mean, I think also what was interesting was when we went through the archival material at the museum with Lucia, and and also discussing how some of the photographs had been taken by so many different people, but they looked the same, and so and also the sort of discovery that they would have like a manual about how to make the subjects pose in this very sort of scientific way. And and so also I think wanting to see whether there had been women that had gone on these excursions, and whether they had used the same sort of manual, or whether they how they were looking and how they were photographing was any different. Was also, I think, really, the discovery of the Mary Throwback was interesting, I think, for me also, to see if there had been a difference, I think, in terms of how she saw and thought through the medium, and, and also the whole excursion. And so that for me, I think that this idea of also many people also photographing the same way and using this very scientific way of photographing. And whether then it is, when you can't distinguish between one photograph to the next as to who has taken it.
Talking about movement.
Yeah, talking about movement. So, we want to come back to the photography, to the photographic medium as a static medium? Question mark? Big question mark. So you're using like bodies in movement, but also histories of migration and your family's migration history. You're telling stories about these histories of movement. So how comes you're using photography, the photographic medium, to tell those stories of movement?
I mean, the work exists both as film and as photographs, but the work, even with the photographs, they're not static. I mean, I think that even in thinking through the process of producing, like the image behind you, it's these life-size cardboard cutouts, almost like a theater set, and so they are movable, and they also, I think, with the series that follows in this presentation that we've put together, Mhlokomedi wa Tora, which is very much about this this narrative that's able to take on many different forms. It's like also thinking through how fluid also memory is, and I, as I mentioned, that when I started the research, I was also specifically interested in the family name, and how the family name had, it's spelled in these 4 different ways, but I mean ultimately it means light, and so this idea of the fact that I work with photography as like this tool that's defined as like writing with light, for example, I found really interesting. I think that connection between that and my family name, and this and that being really at the root of all the work that I'm making around my family history, and this journey of trying to come to the real name or the real narrative behind the name. And so photography, even though it's a static medium, I think with how I'm using photography, or thinking through the sort of fragmented image or the fragmented memory, is, it challenges, I think, the medium in that way, in the fact that within the photographs lives so many photographs. It lives like within that first image, the Pied Piper's Voyage, or even with this installation, it has so many images that were taken from the family photo albums and then scanned and then printed out life size and then turned into the story that has been narrated to me, referencing again, I think, this collective memory, because it is, it's the memory of so many different family members that I then construct as these theater sets. So it moves away and it shifts the medium from being the static medium.
Just to add to something theoretical, I'm sorry. What you do, in my opinion, is to materialize the idea of post-generational memory. So post-generational memory is a term for memory content which gets moved through different generations. And this doesn't mean, and this is very important, that it's like a static content which gets transferred to the next generation, but what it means is that the experience of one generation shapes the entire life of the next generation, and that memory content in the next generation is deeply connected to these past things and gets reshaped by the new experience of the new generation, so that it's like this moving idea. So we come to movement in memory as well, this moving idea of the connections between the generations, and your work is exactly doing this. Like, it is affected by the biographies of your family, by your family narratives, which you integrate in your practice, right?
Yes. I don't think I could add anything.
And do you want to add something, or because no. you were studying at the Market Photo Workshop, Lebohang, right? And John is in the audience. I told you yesterday. So I want to ask you, John. So, is body politics? Is it something that you encourage? Is that a topic that you teach, or that you encourage your students to use their own physical presence in their photographic work, in their practical artistic work, like to interrogate with the stiff roles of photographer and being photographed? Is that something in the curriculum that is present?
Well, I think, my years at the Market Photo Workshop, which was 2002 up until 2015, I think was a very particular historical moment. It was a generation coming after many others. And so in that, I think that there's really interesting points about, what the colonial gaze can do to demand from a position of the black body, but also what it cannot demand, the kind of gestures that are very specifically convention within a particular race and is reproduced from one generation to another generation. I think those are really, really important. They come out perhaps in the work of Nontsikelelo Voleko, Thabiso Sekhala, Lebohang's work. And I think it's critical. So the body is at forefront of talking about a history, because race represents that history. So I think it's constantly involved, it's constantly entangled in the way that portraiture kind of exists. This kind of collective history is also collective performativity. The moment that you sit down for a portrait, you reinvent the history. And I think this is quite important. This is also where we can speak about kind of this reenactments. We can change it and we can shift. And I think a number of photographers took interest in that. I wanted to add, because as Lebohang had mentioned a reference to Kganye as the light, I think that there's something really interesting for me around Santu Mofokeng, who in the black photo album also then refers back to seriti, which is the shadow. And so that if we think about photographing the black body, typically in Africa, we can imagine that there's a shadow because there's always a strong sun. And so the idea of the shadow always present creates kind of a visibility that walks with us. So the shadow always walks with us. So this movement, this constant movement that you were talking about, the shadow is always with us, and that the shadow is not just the photographic representation of dark and light, but it's also our soul. So I think there's something quite potent in that.
Shall we maybe open our roundtable for the audience? So if you have any comments, thoughts, perspectives, please.
There were so many aspects we haven't touched yet, right? The touristic gaze, for example.
Oh my gosh, we have so many aspects. Yeah.
I mean, I do think also to just add on to what John was saying around the shadow, but also the spirituality also that's also linked to photography. And I think also when you think about the, like these photos, for example, and also the photos and as they relate and as photography relates to people that have also passed on, and this, and the theory behind, photography and death. I think that there's really something, within that context. I think all of it is really happening also with the work that we've just seen. And so I think for a lot of photographers working with portraiture from my generation, the work of someone like Santu has been really important. Also in thinking around photography, also from like a bit, in terms of also language, like for example, using the term siriti and really unpacking it, I think, around the, it not just being the shadow, but it also connecting to spirituality, and then how all of that then comes back into the theory of theories, I think, within photography, or the discourses within photography.
I think it's such a pity that we cannot touch this topic, because now I think we should really talk about this as well with Emka Eyongakbat, for example, doing this amazing work, activating his body by feeling the spiritual energies of spaces to create his photographic work. Well, but we don't have time to talk.
We don't have time. But if there are urgent questions, maybe one or two. But otherwise, we keep on the discussion later in the final discussion. So note your questions, or
it's probably not really a question, but something I just discovered in your talk. And because John, you mentioned the moment when someone is being portrayed, that person invents herself in that moment and creates his own or her own history. And what I was hearing in your talk was those very valuable moments where we go into archives, Lebohang, as you do. And I was wondering, what's the quality of this archival material, those archival photographs, since we're interested in photography. So we pick these specific materials which have been not looked at for such a long time, and I think now I'm seeing maybe it's specifically this material which has the quality of empowering us all together to renegotiate history, and because we've been writing history anyways, and the power structures that were put upon, or where it was made. So history is not something factual, and photography, those archival photographs have the quality to bring us maybe also back to those moments and reinvent history again, and also speculate what could have been. Lebohang, I was quite interested in seeing how you were looking for this female gaze or female view on those places in the archive. So what could have been, and using photography to answer this question, because we were too sure about things, and yes, now we can. It's very interesting to see how we can question with this material what could have been. That's what I just heard somehow in between. I don't know if this is of value, but I'm always interested in what other things can we do with photography. Yes, obviously making more photographs doesn't help, so yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much, Lebohang, for joining us today. Yes? Oh, okay, sorry.
It's sad that I can't be there.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't want to open a completely new chapter, but maybe I do. Sophia, you were talking about like what is the meaning of a picture? Like, is there, let's say, like a soul in a picture? And then we also come back to the topic of restitution somehow, because we are talking like giving back dignity to the people that were photographed in those colonial archives and so on. And I was wondering like how the museum is dealing with this kind of impossibility of this huge archive, like anonymous archive, but also, is there like a strategy or somehow a possibility to give that back to the people? Or, because I have to, in my opinion, photographs have like a soul or like a part of the people in it, no?
Yeah, that's why I was talking about photograph as human remains, because in the actual restitution debate, photographs don't play a role, which is really astonishing, I think. Yeah, and there has been, of course, approaches of working, of giving back. In a first approach, I mean, digital technique allows us to share the images, of course, but in my opinion, the photographic objects are not different from like the other ethnographic objects. So giving back definitely is an option and will take place, of course.
I really think it's. I mean, I agree with you, and it's not on us to decide. It's on, when I say us, I mean like white institutions. It's not on us to say this is what now has to be done. It's more about like stepping back and saying, you, the ones who got photographed, or you, the next generations after the ones who got photographed, who got objectified, you have the right to decide what to do. So I think this is really important, that it's to shift these power relations which accompanied this entire colonial discourse, which we are still living in. It's not like we have overcome this by any means.
It's about access, and then you get to the discussion, what is access in the colonial archives? So only putting things online doesn't mean that anyone can access it. So it's still a way to go. It's a discussion.
I think also with people that have been photographed, that have passed on, and the sort of many generations that follow that don't even know that the photos exist. And so how does that claim sort of happen, and how do those decisions happen?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So and I think that a huge part of also the trip, for example, to Cameroon, for me also it serves as that. It serves as as an opportunity for me to have a real sense of the context in which these photos, not fully, but in which these photos were taken, but to also not create a response from, again, as an outsider, because just because I come from Africa doesn't mean that I fully understand, the history of Cameroon or the context of Cameroon. And so that's why, for me, traveling, I think similar to me creating the work about my family, it would not have made sense to create it from, with like family members that I encounter a lot of the times. But it was important to, to really travel, I think, beyond what I understood or what I thought I understood about the narrative.
I think we close now the discussion. Thanks everyone for listening. Thanks Lebohang.
Thank you.